the back and forth between Governor DeSantis of Florida and President Biden and all the Democrats and all Biden's handlers and enablers and all the rest of it, throwing down over the COVID issue. It's almost like this is really political, and they don't care what the actual numbers are. We'll get into that. Plus, Representative Cori Bush wants to defund police while demanding that she continue her own private security detail. The McCloskeys in St. Louis, remember them during the BLM riots? They've been pardoned by the governor of Missouri, and some people are saying that that's not enough. They're going to go after them still. Plus, fallout from not just one Cuomo, but the bros Cuomo, the governor facing impeachment imminently. Plus, you have the other one, the bro Cuomo over at CNN, who is facing an ethics issue, but Jeff Zucker will probably catch us back. But let's first, Clay, start with how all of a sudden it's Texas and Florida's fault that there's this Delta variant situation, according to Joe Biden.
Florida and Texas account for 1/3 of all new COVID-19 cases in the entire country. Just 2 states. Look, we need leadership from everyone. If some governors aren't willing to do the right thing to beat this pandemic, then they should allow businesses and universities who want to do the right thing to be able to do it. I say to these governors, please help. But if you aren't going to help, at least get out of the way of the people who are trying to do the right thing. Use your power to save lives.
You know what this is, Clay? This is the president of the United States, who runs the federal government, complaining about red states, where at least with Republican leadership right now, red states that are trying to protect the rights of people and end the COVID tyranny. Biden is saying, step aside so we can have the private sector do our dirty work. Step aside so the federal mandates will be easier to put through without states trying to block us.
Yeah, and not only this, remember, this goes back a ways, right? There has been a desire, I think, for Joe Biden to shift the blame for anything COVID related to anybody in a red state. Remember what happened when Texas opened up? He said it was Neanderthal thinking that the state of Texas would in any way be opening up. And there was all the discussion about all the craziness that was going to happen, all the virus that was going to spread. And Governor Greg Abbott opened up. And for the most part, what we are seeing is this new Delta variant has come in. But if the Delta variant didn't exist or hadn't made its way into the country, there was virtually no COVID left in the old variants, if you want to call them. And so this is Biden, who ran his entire campaign predicated on, I will keep you safe, who ran his entire campaign from the basement, now looking around and trying to figure out who he can blame because COVID has reared its ugly head again. Now, the data doesn't reflect that anybody should be panicked, but I think what Republicans are looking for is somebody who can fight back. And I actually think this plays really well for Abbott and DeSantis to be able to go head-to-head with Joe Biden, and that's what Governor DeSantis down in Florida just did.
Exactly right. Here he is, the governor of Florida, lighting up Biden on this one.
Joe Biden suggests that if you don't do lockdown policies, then you should, quote, get out of the way. But let me tell you this. If you're coming after the rights of parents in Florida, I'm standing in your way. I'm not going to let you get away with it. If you're trying to deny kids a proper in-person education, I'm going to stand in your way, and I'm going to stand up for the kids in Florida. If you're trying to restrict people, impose mandates, if you're trying to ruin their jobs and their livelihoods and their small business, if you are trying to lock people down, I am standing in your way, and I'm standing for the people of Florida. So why don't you do your job? Why don't you get this border secure? And until you do that, I don't want to hear a blip about COVID from you.
So he's got him nailed on the border issue, which is a total mess, as we've discussed here before, wide open. And it's wide open, Clay, notably because of specific decisions made by the Biden administration starting in January of this year, like ending the Remain in Mexico policy, the destruction of interior enforcement against illegal aliens all across the country. So that's been a choice that's been made. But don't you remember, Clay, when the states were asserting the rights back when Trump was in power? We were being told by places like New York, first of all, Cuomo was going to have his own vaccine testers. You remember this?
Yeah.
That you couldn't trust the vaccines, that there were going to be state authorities overriding the federal authorities. Now you have a federal government that's saying, oh, the states don't get to actually use quarantine powers or decide not to use them as they see fit. Top-down federal tyranny. That's what it feels like.
Can you imagine if they decide, and we don't know how it's going to play out, to bring Joe Biden back because they're terrified about Kamala Harris having the lowest approval ratings of any vice president in most of our lives? Can you imagine Ron DeSantis against Joe Biden on a debate stage? I mean this honestly. I'm not sure that I can think of any matchup we've ever seen in a presidential election that would be more of a slaughter than DeSantis going head-to-head with Joe Biden, right? Biden left himself open for one haymaker after another. Trump was a mess in that first debate. Second debate, he clocked him. Imagine what DeSantis would be able to do with 82-year-old Joe Biden if they tried a Weekend at Bernie's Part 2 style, drag Joe Biden across the finish line again. I think there's nervousness in the White House because when they have these back and forths, DeSantis is destroying the logic underpinning any of the criticisms from Joe Biden, and he's doing it as the governor of Florida, not even really on an equal footing. This is a bad, I think, calculus by Joe Biden to try to blame some of these Republican governors because I think it blows up in his face.
Well, what's really happening here is the Democrats are trying to take the first step to the permanent COVID health security theater state. They're trying to keep this in a place now where it'll be here forever, because if you start to get mandates in enough places, if you start to have people that have set up, say, vaccine passports, LA's thinking about it. They already have LA City Councilman thinking about it. New York is still on the line for it. The Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, is expected to make mandatory for all active duty military personnel, mandatory COVID vaccination, which then you have to ask, doesn't that have to be mandatory for all federal personnel too? And this is the incrementalism of the permanent COVID state. It's happening right now when we should be talking about how we get to full normalcy. Instead, they're trying to enshrine aspects of the apparatus of control and the bureaucracy that will linger forever, and they'll more variants, another upsurge in the wintertime. It'll all be there already. The whole system will be there in order to assert levers of control against us. That's what I see the Democrats doing right now. They're trying to do it while people are still concerned enough, the numbers are high enough that they can get away with some of it, because otherwise, what are we really even talking about with them at this point? Like, they're not going to actually get to zero COVID. They want to put this apparatus in place so that they can have a lot of control over our lives for a very long time to come.
And the larger context, I would say, is the variants aren't going to stop coming. And vaccination isn't going to end the variants because, again, look at what's going on around the world. The percentage of vaccinations around the world are very low. Where did the Delta variant come from? India. Where are the future variants going to come from? Third world countries that have not been able to vaccinate their people. And there's always going to be a new variant of COVID. It would seem to me for years and years, this is becoming, as we've talked about on the show, endemic and flu-like, in that this isn't going to be, at least not based on anything that I'm seeing so far from the vaccines, this isn't going to be polio that basically ceases to exist. This isn't going to be a measles or a mumps where it almost doesn't exist anywhere. This is going to be endemic. It's going to be like the flu, and there's always going to be, at least in the short term, until people start to act rationally and reasonably, and evidence out there of why you should be panicking, and the evidence of panic allows the continued capturing of freedom. And that's what we're seeing happen right now, is all over the country, this expansion, which we had hoped was going to start to diminish with the vaccines. It hasn't. Freedom continuing to be gobbled up.
DeSantis spoke about how, by having an open border, to your point, Clay, about the variants and how there'll be continuations of iterations of variants, right? That's what's going to end up happening. And let's also not forget that Fauci said just yesterday we could be heading for vaccine-resistant COVID this fall. So essentially saying even, we might get to a place where variants completely evade the vaccines, which is fascinating. Almost like what happens sometimes with the flu, but that's a whole other conversation we'll get into, which we have not been able to conquer and eliminate entirely. But here's Governor DeSantis saying, we're just bringing it all in.
He's bringing in people from over 100 different countries across the southern border. Every variant on this planet, some we don't even know about, are absolutely coming into our country that way. And what they're doing is people are coming and then they're farming them out all over the United States, putting them on buses, putting them on planes. And so when he's lecturing people about imposing COVID restrictions and lockdown policies on the one hand, and yet not only doing nothing to stop the border surge, but actually facilitating it on the other hand, he just loses all credibility when it comes to COVID.
If you want to fly into the U.S. from the UK, Clay, and the Democrats get their way, it's going to be mandatory vaccination. There's going to be a whole bureaucracy around it. If you just walk across the U.S.-Mexico border and read off the little sheet of paper that the cartels give you to say, I want to claim asylum in your country, you get released. You get let go.
Not only that, if you go to Mexico on vacation, you have to have a negative test to come back from Mexico. I did that in February. But if I had been, and I'm a citizen, obviously, if I had been walking across the border, it wouldn't have been an issue at all. And DeSantis is right that there is a strong argument that can be tied together. And I think it's a really potent one for the Republican Party to tie border insecurity to COVID variant spreads, because they're going to be coming from somewhere outside of this country by and large, and that's where the danger comes from. So are you going to secure the border or not? It's a tough response for the Biden White House, I think, there, given the failures they have at the border right now.